With the PlayStation being home to many unique and interesting racing games, later on in the console's life cycle, we did begin to see many clones and rehashed versions of games appear on the market, most of them by the same types of developers or companies that would reuse content from other games or packages and just rebrand them under different names. And one of the games on this list that we'll be looking at simply goes under the name of Formula Grand Prix or Formula GP, as it's more commonly known as. That was developed by a relatively unknown developer under the name of Kung Fu, but would be published by Midas Interactive. And as we all know, Midas has its fair share of interesting games, to say the least, that did develop or work with some decent games over the years, but definitely were notorious for publishing games that were questionable, to say the least. But with these two brands combined, they were culprits of this idea that I mentioned, rehashing the same type of games over and over again, and Formula GP is no different. The earliest ideas that you can see of this game is that if you look at All-Star Action, All-Star Racing Series, 5-Star Racing, and even some of the other collections, even Stock Car Racing, there were so many different games released under this collaboration that used the same gameplay engine, same aesthetics. Even when I think back, there was a couple of truck racing games like Truck Racing and Truck Racer, which essentially were the same game, just they were rebranded under different names, but they were sold separately, and they all took elements from either the same tracks or they used the same assets from cars and just environmental elements, and just like I said, you reused them for the same games. And this is no different. In one of the All-Star Action games, you did have a Formula 1 or GP segment in it that was almost identical to this. Now there will be some changes in this regarding to some of the tracks, but the same tracks that are in this game would also have been used in some of the other games that I've mentioned. If you look and dive deep enough into it, you can guarantee you'll notice the similarities. Now in saying that, right, they're not high quality games. They're more lower budget entries, and it's not to say that they're bad. If anything, that's the funny thing about them, they're not bad games at all. They just could have offered a lot more. If anything, for me personally, now this is just my opinion, they feel more like overly glorified demos, because there's no real options apart from your difficulty levels, which yeah, you'll definitely notice the differences in the terms of the difficulty settings. If you pick an easy, you'll win races fairly handy enough. Medium will give you a decent challenge. If you play them hard, it's very, very difficult to win races because they're so far ahead of you that the chances of you catching up with, unless you make a mistake, or when you do make a mistake, it's almost race over. But aside from that, there's no other real options apart from, right, there's no licensed drivers or teams or whatever. You just have the same car, you just change the visual aesthetics in terms of the graphics or the textures that appear, and that's pretty much it. And you also have a lack of different options, like you do have practice and time trial and you single race modes, but that's literally it. There's no championship, there's no real sessions involved to allow you to build any sort of progress or to unlock new features later on in the game, like with the championship where you can earn points based off of winning to increase your overall standing on the leaderboards. Because the one thing to take away from a lot of these games is that with other types of racing games is that there was always some form of progression where you could unlock things or you could achieve something the further into the game that you got, or you got rewarded for winning races. That isn't the case with these games at all. Literally what you see is what you get, and that's it in a nutshell, pretty much. But it would have just been nice to have some form of progression, like I said, maybe a leaderboard system or some sort of championship, or give you additional tracks or give you additional cars or some other features that you could unlock, so that you give you some sort of progression and a reason to play it, which is a shame really. But in saying that, it does have enough unique pick up and play appeal. Like if you want to play a game in short bursts, this will definitely give you that. And all of the games in the same type of category, whether it be bike racing, truck racing, stock car racing, whatever it is, you will get that if that's what you're looking for. But if you're looking for a more authentic or realistic or more progression based experience, these won't give you that. But it is what it is. It's another one of these Formula 1 style games that was released on the system, which to be honest there are quite a few of them that have been released over the years, and they do come in a variety of different mixes between good, bad, not so good, and anywhere in between. But if you've played the better ones, like even going back to the original Formula 1 games by Psygnosis, you'll know the differences in the quality straight away, as they're definitely one of the more and most true authentic experiences that you could ever have in a racing game, period. Whereas these games do lack in that department. Like, they're not the worst games in the world. Now people may disagree with me, but then at the same time, when we look back, many of these games contributed to people's childhoods. Like a lot of people growing up would have played a lot of these games because these were budget entry games for a reason. Not everybody had access access or could afford to buy games like Gran Turismo or other high-end games. Sometimes these were the only games that people could afford. And in fairness, there's people out there that got as much enjoyment out of playing these short-lived games more than most of the games that they had. So it doesn't say or take away from the fact that they're bad games, because they're not. They're just a lot more simplified compared to anything else that's out there. But in my own personal opinion, I genuinely think they could have been a wee bit better. They could have just added a wee bit more variety to it. Because if you're going to keep rehashing the same game over and over again, at least add something more to it to make it more worthwhile, and at least worthwhile spending your money on it. But in saying that, back then a lot of people would have been completely oblivious to it, to these aspects. When we look at it now in retrospect, and now we have access to play these games on emulation, and if you spend time playing any of these games like I have, which I have covered in previous videos on the channel, I'll make sure to leave a link to a playlist to them all in the description, you'll know rightly well that when you've played one, you've pretty much played them all. But that wouldn't have been a thing back then, because not everybody would have been aware of that. Not everybody would have realised that. It's not until you have played a few of them then you realise that essentially they're just the same games in many respects. But it is what it is. It was just a sign of the times. You still do see that today in most regards, where games would be rehashed or rebranded under different names, but you don't see it as often. But definitely back then it was more of a thing than it is now. But regardless, I would love to know your thoughts of Formula GP for the PlayStation, and what did you think of it overall? Is this a game that you even grew up playing, or did you enjoy these type of racing games, or did you play any of the other games within this category that I've mentioned that were also by the same developer? So it will be interesting to hear whatever stories you do have of these games, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content on more of these games which I already have covered on the channel, then you can check out the playlist on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.